Good evening. You're watching Sunday Interview with me, your host, Gravazio Zulu. Minister of Finance, Dr. Bwalya on Friday unveiled a 106 billion kwacha 2020 national budget with emphasis on stimulating the domestic economy. But with a near-empty resource envelope, a heavy debt burden, and a limping private sector, it is interesting to see how the government will ensure economic growth and poverty reduction with measures placed in the budget. The minister has made several important pronouncements, key among them policy reversal on proposed sales tax and a huge increase in allocation of funds for dismantling of domestic arrears. Well, Dr. Ngandu is on the program with me this evening to try and answer some of the questions as we interrogate the 2020 national budget. Doc, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Congratulations. It's the first time we're hosting you on Sunday Interview since your appointment.
Yes, that's true.
I suppose you've settled now. No room to relax.
Well, in this job, you hit the ground running. You don't take too long to settle. So, yeah, I have settled.
Now, one of the newspapers, daily newspapers, Times of Zambia to be precise, described you, I suppose correctly, as minister without finance. How easy was it for you to come up with this budget with very little or no resources at all?
Well, the description of me as minister without finance actually came from an article which was written by Professor Oliver Sasa. So he's the one who called me minister without finance. Yeah. I think the reality of the situation is not that I don't have finance. I have finance, but the space, or what we refer to generally as the fiscal space, is constrained, meaning that there are certain non-discretionary obligations that we have to meet, which are taking up a great percentage of the resource envelope. And for that reason, there is less left for us to place in other sectors like education, agriculture, perhaps even the social support system. So that's really what it means. That
you really don't have, you may have the money, but probably doesn't belong to you.
No, I have. Look, I think the easiest way of looking at it is to split the resources into two broad envelopes. There is what we call the non-discretionary expenditure, and this is expenditure that you have to meet without fail. And falling into that category is the servicing of debt obligations. And two is the remuneration to employees of government, because you can't carry your staff without paying them. Now, after you have paid out those two important items I've mentioned, then what is left is what is called discretionary, meaning that you have to make decisions as to where you put so much as opposed to so much. And so it is a trade-off between how much do I put in this sector and how much do I put in that sector. Now, if the quantity that's left for you after you've dealt with the non-discretionary part of your budget is large, then you will obviously apportion large amounts of money as a percentage of the total budget itself.
The president did raise concern, I think, during his address to Parliament, that we were spending, was it over 90%? On just debt servicing and remuneration for wages, and then you remain with probably 9% or 10% to put into development, put on health, put on education and other social sectors.
Yeah, the president was right. Look, if you just look at the debt servicing, the external debt servicing here, and I'm not referring to domestic debt, but just external debt servicing obligations alone, we have somewhere in the region of 33 billion kwacha. So I'm spending 33 billion kwacha as of now just to service those obligations. Now, if there is a depreciation in the exchange rate, because all these loans are denominated in foreign currency, if there is a depreciation in the kwacha, it means that in kwacha terms, the amount of money that I have to put out to service these obligations will also increase, meaning then that I have to eat more into what I've referred to as the discretionary component of the budget. And then our remuneration is somewhere around 25 billion. If you put those two together, you have about 58 billion. Now, in the budget, what I've indicated is that I will raise about 72, 73 billion from revenue, and grants. So if you take 58 as a percentage of that, you find it's close to 80%. But what I haven't included in here is the amortization, which is meaning the servicing of the principal components of the debt. So if you put all those things together, the president is right. What's left is pretty close to 10%.
So you basically had nothing to spend. Have you tried to change this scenario in this budget?
Well, what I'm hoping to do...
It's basically the same we had last year, and that's what we have this year. 10% for spending?
Yeah, what I've done in this budget is obviously to identify certain important components of the budget, which I think if we spend enough or we put enough resources in that area, we'll be able to begin to stimulate economic activity. I think it's not a secret that there is not much liquidity in our economy, that local businesses are hurting. And one contributor to that is our inability as government to service the debts that we owe to the domestic suppliers of goods and services to us. So if we begin to dismantle that mountain of arrears and put liquidity in the market, what will happen is you will see an improvement in the level of economic activity taking place. And with that, you will also improve the ability of ZRA to collect more. Because if there is business taking place, more money is exchanging hands and people are creating wealth, you'll be able to tax them even higher. So that is the one important aspect that I want to unlock in this budget. I have increased the amount quite substantially from around 400 million in the last budget to 2.3 billion. Okay, in comparison to the extent of the
arrears that you have,
yeah,
it could be a drop in the ocean.
It is a drop in the ocean, but I think it's a beginning. And my hope also is that as we begin to unwind the fiscal space, as we begin to perhaps rescope some of the existing projects to create additional revenue, to free up additional revenue, we could divert resources to that. But that obviously is something that we can look at as we do the midterm review of the budget performance.
That seems to be the major thrust of your budget, dismantling the domestic arrears.
Yes.
But without taking it away from you, I know that this is a song for probably 4 or 5 years ago. I know that Honorable Mtati, sitting as finance minister, did release a statement to Parliament on Zambia Plus, the recovery plan, and the emphasis in there again was to unlock the potential of the local subcontractors and suppliers by paying them the debt. I don't think that really worked. Last year's budget, Honorable Monakatwe did set as an objective to pay dismantle domestic debt. We do not seem to be getting it right, or is it the lack of resources? Well, you have it again in this budget.
Yeah, there is
rhetoric,
obviously.
Maybe we call it rhetoric?
No, it is not. I want us to move away from the idea that we present a budget with a view of duping people, because that's not the intention. I don't think it's a good start. It's a good point to start from by giving people promises which you don't think you'll be able to fulfill, which is why I've been fairly modest in what promises I can make in this budget. There are clearly challenges that sometimes force the implementers of the budget to shift emphasis or payments in the course of implementation. But I think, for me, it is important that we revive this economy. And if we don't put liquidity in it, it will just further go into inactivity, worse than it is right now. I mean, I was comparing the state of the economy now to a man who doesn't have enough blood in his system. If you don't have enough blood in your system, what do? You transfuse, don't you? Because if you don't transfuse, you will die. So for the economy, it's the liquidity that basically is the transfusion. So we do have to put money into this economy. But also, I think we need to, as a government, accept responsibility for the fact that a lot of our people who provided goods and services to government are hurting.
Some have closed shop.
I have been told that. I've been told that businesses have collapsed. I've been told some people have lost houses.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, I must accept the moral responsibility for that as Minister of Finance, because we owe it to them to pay them what they expect us to pay, because they provided a service. So it is a priority. I will try my best.
You sound honest enough, but then if I'm sitting there as a contractor and I listened to Honorable Mtati and I listened to Honorable Manakato and I listened to you yesterday, I must be asking my question, one big question. What is different now? Why should they trust you? I mean, where is the assurance now that, look, you heard all this, now you're getting your money?
Yeah. Well, firstly, Honorable Manakato had, I think, somewhere around 400 million to disperse. Now, if you have a debt portfolio of close to 12 billion, I think, at the time, even when you pay your 400, it's a drop in the ocean. I have a similar situation where the amount of money that I'm electing to put into this is, to some extent, a drop in the ocean. But it's a beginning.
How much is the total domestic?
The total debt of arrears is somewhere around 16 billion. So it's huge. It's a huge amount. Now I'm putting 2.3 billion. So you can see the challenge that I have.
That could be less than a quarter.
Yeah. Which is why I'm saying that it is a beginning. It is a beginning. And the greater challenge even is to determine exactly the criteria you use for deciding who gets what. So one of the things that the implementers, the technocrats in the ministry will work on is a system that will be transparent so that I don't end up with people screaming and yelling that we are only paying our relatives, we are only paying our friends. There has to be a transparent system.
Paying party members.
Party members or whatever. So that will be the first step. We clearly define the criteria, whether we will be paying a portion of a certain amount to each person involved or whether we will be on a first in, first out basis, I don't know. But is
this one of the first things you're going to do in come January? Or you have to wait until March, April, May?
Well, you know, money comes in trickles. I mean, we collect revenue on a monthly basis. We collect, I think, something like 30 billion or so. So we'll have to obviously work out a schedule of when we pay what. Because as you correctly mentioned, my resource basket is constrained. So when you're in that situation, one of the important things you have to learn to do is to plan and plan carefully. But the process will start. In fact, the process will start now. Part of the other things that you mentioned relating to the overall management of the debt situation, the work has already begun. We have already identified in the road sector those projects that we want to rescope. And by rescoping here, I mean we will be moving away from bituminous standard roads to all-weather gravel roads for the time being. But what is important is that you provide a road that people can access, can use throughout all the seasons. And you find the biggest challenge we have in particularly the rural areas is that in the rainy season, people cannot move around. So that is something that we have already done. We have pretty much worked out a schedule of the loans which we intend to cancel.
I was going to ask you that because you restated in your budget, besides the announcement of austerity measures by your predecessor, that you were going to cancel loans, reschedule some, rescope projects, as you say, cancel the projects that stop funding projects that are below 80% completion, and all those measures. People are still waiting. You haven't gotten back to the Zambian to tell him or her that, look, now we're cancelling these 5 loans and we're going to save 10 billion. We are rescoping this road and this is what we're saving. 10 roads will be rescoped. 20 roads are being funded. 10 will hold. Why are you holding that information to yourselves as government?
Firstly, let me explain. The process of determining which projects you cancel is probably not as straightforward as the simple criterion that we will cancel projects that are below 85% completion. Because if you get a project that was funded by a loan, you have to take into account that there is, on the other side, the creditor. And the creditors have to be engaged. You have to speak to them. You have to agree terms on which you will discontinue if that is the case. And in some cases, discontinuing can actually end up costing you more in terms of financial ability. Now, common sense will tell you that if you cancel a loan, just because you said you're going to cancel loans, and then they take you to court and you lose the case and you pay more than you would have paid if you had continued with the loan and the project, then it obviously doesn't make sense. So that is something that you have to avoid. So we are clearly, carefully going through this to see which projects can be cancelled, following that general criterion that you have mentioned, but also to see if there are any potential legal liabilities that might arise from cancelling. Now, we have compiled a fairly elaborate list, but before I announce, I have to take it to Cabinet. I have to accept the concurrence. I have to obtain the concurrence of my colleagues in Cabinet and obviously the President to say, yes, we all agree that this is the way to go. You know, we operate on the basis of collective responsibility, and collective responsibility requires that discuss. You just don't make a decision on yourself by yourself.
You estimate how much you expect to save?
No, I won't tell you that, because that will be telling before. Because if I give you a number now, and then in the discussion, cabinet says no, let's reduce that or increase that, you know, then the number will change, and it will seem like I was not telling the truth. I was short of being truthful, which is what I don't want to be. But the fact of the matter is, the position we are in requires that we do this. Because we cannot continue with the current situation of debt being where it is at. You have already very clearly and carefully analyzed the implications on how much we're able to put in different sectors of the economy. That's a challenge, obviously, that we want to overcome. So I think we will all address this matter. It's a matter that I think is well accepted by everybody in Cabinet, that we need to address this issue of debt and begin to give the economy the opportunity to readjust so that we create the space. Furthermore, the additional thing that we're obviously seeking to do is to identify those loans which we can have refinanced. Particularly if you can take one or two loans and collapse them into one and then seek a refinancing for them. That is helpful, because what it will do is to create additional space for us. So if I take, for example, a loan which is supposed to mature in 5 years, and I'm able to restructure it, or take 3-4 loans, collapse them and able to restructure them over a period of 20 years, for example, that gives me additional room, and that releases resources which then we can use to meet some of the other challenges that we are talking about.
But then when you begin to refinance, again, you're accused of not caring for the future, because then you borrow and you know you won't be there to sort out the mess. 20 years, you will not be finance minister, and probably the whole cabinet will not be there, and it will be first for the future to sort out the loans.
Well, refinancing is a common strategy in business, in running government. When you refinance a loan, remember, a loan exists. So all you're doing is changing the terms and conditions of that loan and spreading it over a longer period of time so that you are able to relieve the pressure that you are under. But you see, one of the things that will do is it will create, I think, opportunity for more resources to go into the productive sector of the economy and begin to get the economy to grow and to become more resilient. So if we can get the economy on a stronger trajectory in terms of growth, then we have an ability at that point to be able to relook at some of these loans, and perhaps we can even again seek to have them redeemed in a shorter period of time. But as of now, it is necessary, it is important that we refinance some of these loans.
You've announced one strong measure here, stringent, that you want to stop accrual of arrears. And I suppose arrears are accrued as a result of a need. How do you intend to stop that? Well, this looks like a very abrupt and very stern action. No, it's not abrupt and stern. There's no point in you having a mountain of arrears and then continuing to obtain debt or goods and services from people that you are not able to pay, so that you just increase the size of that mountain. The instruction that has gone out to all government departments is that before you spend, make sure that you have the resources to meet that expenditure. So if we operate on that basis, we will not be building these domestic arrears. So don't go out there contracting services from people when it's not in your budget, when you cannot support it. So what that means now is that the way we run government must be run a lot more efficiently than what we've been doing before. And if you run government more efficiently, then you find that
the need for accumulating additional arrears will not be there.
Let me get to some of the fundamentals on your objectives. You are less ambitious on growth. And maybe as a result of what we're experiencing now, you're projecting 2% growth, down from 4% for the 2019 budget. Why?
You know, well, the current budget is 2% growth here. Mine is 3%. So if that's being ambitious, then I'm not being less than ambitious. I think one has to be realistic, because when you're looking at growth, you're looking at the different aspects of the performance of the economy. Desegregate the economy into the various sectors. This year, the reason we are projecting 2% growth is that if you look at the agricultural sector, what do you see? You see agriculture that has been badly decimated by the impact of drought. I have had the displeasure of driving from Lusaka to Livingston because I wanted to get a sense of what had happened in Southern Province. And the story is sad. You could see that agriculture has been decimated completely. So agriculture overall has been heavily affected by the poor performance, by the poor rainfall. But also we know what has happened to power generation. Everybody's talking about load shedding and so on. But you see, load shedding, for a lot of us, load shedding is a nuisance because it means I can't get my bath in the morning and so on. But it goes beyond being a nuisance. It affects the performance of industry and industrial output. And that's what you see in reduced growth of the economy. And for various reasons, also the mining sector hasn't been performing very well. This year, I know we have had a closure of I think it's the concentrator, or the smelter rather, the smelter by Mopani mines to rehabilitate. That has affected the production of copper. So all these factors have had an impact in pushing the economic growth downwards.
Now when you project 3%, 4%, it doesn't really give hope to people that then there's going to be poverty reduction, there's going to be real growth, real development without growth. Yeah,
well, I could sit here.
It's a dream.
I could sit here and dream a number like 11%, and everybody will say, "Oh yeah, the minister is very ambitious," but ambition must be within reason. We're coming from this background of all these challenges that we have to meet, and I have already explained to you, for example, that I'm spending 33 billion, which is pretty close to 30% of 33% of the revenue on just debt servicing alone, just debt. Now that is money that could go to stimulate economic activity. It's not going there. So when we're talking about dealing with the debt situation, we're talking about it within that scope and that respect, that if we can meet the challenge of debt, we will now allow the economy to begin to breathe and begin to expand. We're giving opportunity for liquidity, for the banking system to begin to respond. For example, my presence, and when I say my presence, I mean the government's presence in the domestic market, government securities market, is itself a challenge. But I need to be in the market. And it's a challenge to the respect that if we borrow from the market, and we borrow heavily, we push the yield rates upward. And when the yield rates go up, the banking system adjusts its own lending rates because they use these yield rates as reference rate for their own lending. So like right now, the yield rates are on bonds are somewhere around over 30%. So if the Ministry of Finance, if I as a Minister of Finance, if I am borrowing from the market at 30%, what rate do you think the bank will lend to you? Because I'm government. Government doesn't disappear. Government doesn't get sick. Minister gets replaced, but another minister comes in. Government continues. So the risk is not there. So in a sense, my rate is what you might call a risk-free rate. In your case, because you do represent a risk and there are also administrative nightmares in lending to you, most likely you'll borrow at a rate that's higher than mine. So in a sense, we are pushing rates up. And when you do that, you constrict credit in the market. The price of money goes up, so fewer people borrow. Or those who take the risk of borrowing at rates as high as 38% run the risk of not succeeding in their project, because it's difficult to imagine what returns you would have to make to be able to service a loan that you're obtaining at 38%. So all these are interrelated, and all these are the challenges that we have to look at and see. So the debt hangover of government itself is part of the contributor to the suppressed growth, but also you have to understand that government has a role of stimulating economic activity. Fiscal stimulus of government, you put money in the economy. And in our case, it's paying that will help us to do that.
Now, you've spoken very well about the environment and the impact of climate change. The president did articulate that in his speech as well. But looking at your budget, it speaks to the contrary. You're failing to walk the talk. Your allocation to environmental protection is down from, I think, 895 to 611 million.
Yeah, I think the number you saw there was for one institution, the Environmental Protection Agency or something. That's the number that is shown. But environmental protection is a cross-cutting issue, and all cross-cutting issues have been catered for in the various budgets of ministries. So if you take energy, for example, energy and the budget to energy took into account the fact that there has to be adjustment made in that space. If you look at the Ministry of Natural Resources, also we took into account as we're budgeting the fact that they have to cater for the impact of environmental and climate change. So it's a cross-cutting issue.
So your explanation would be that you've moved part of this money to these other sectors.
Yeah, it's a cross-cutting issue.
And this drop does not really reflect a real...
You put together a number of functions that you are supposed to be funding and see how you can rationalize the resources. And this is obviously arising from the fact that I have a limited basket. So it's easier for me to expand activities within one ministry to cover cross-cutting issues like youth. You'll find that youth is the same. You won't see any number there specifically for youth because it's a cross-cutting issue. You won't find any number there with respect to maybe women or the physically challenged. It's because it's a cross-cutting issue. So when the Minister of Fisheries and Livestock is looking at our programs to support aquaculture, for example, she needs in her budget to cater for the youth, not just for old men like us, but the youth, the women, and so on. So you have to disaggregate the budget by ministry. And what we'll be doing is I'll be sitting with each ministry to see how best the allocation is made to reflect the need to allocate reasonably and sufficiently to these cross-cutting issues.
Still looking at allocation, a quick scan, I note that general services, defense, public order and security seem to be the only sectors in the budget that have received increased funding compared to 2019 budget.
Yeah.
Economic activity, no increase in there. Actually a drop.
Well, yeah, but in general services, there's a lot of things that are in there. You know, so you have again to desegregate each of these items to be able to see. But it's a lot of things that are in there. I know defense has been raised as an issue because
and public order and security. Do we have such a huge challenge that defense, public order and security seem to be growing? Then we seem to be reducing on health, education, and others.
Let me first just talk about defense alone. The challenge of defense is that the technology in the defense sector changes very quickly, and you find yourself with a lot of obsolete equipment and machinery. Now, you can't have a defense force that has obsolete equipment, obsolete machinery. But as you replace them, the cost of replacement initially is reasonably high. And I think that's what is reflected in there. We have to do this. But it's a one-off expenditure, and once it's expended, in the following year, you'll find that the amount that will be allocated to there will be a much more reduced number.
Public security, public order, same excuse, same explanation.
Public security, I I can't quite remember exactly what the actual amount allocated to that, but it's not that huge. It's just that it's compounded. It's inside this figure which looks huge, but what you need to do is to disaggregate and break it down into specific components of it, and you find that it's a huge array of items that go in there. Yeah.
Let's move on to one. You made a major policy reversal in your budget presentation. Sales tax. You announced that VAT stays. That is after you spent almost the whole year, I mean, not personally you, but your ministry and government, justifying and convincing the nation that sales tax was the way to go. What changed?
Well, let's begin from the beginning. The concern over, the reason why the conversation around sales tax began was the legitimate concern over the accumulation of VAT arrears owed to mining companies and also to some extent other entities. And two, that there was very often a mismatch between input VAT and output VAT, and that mismatch resulted in ZRA paying out more than it was collecting. Now, that's an anomaly, because ordinarily VAT input should equal to VAT output. What you put in and what you take out should be matching, because I collect from you, ring fence that amount, and then I pay you back. But in between obviously, because I have collected from you, and if you yourself, in carrying out your business, you incur VAT, you will subtract that from what you paid me, and that's what you claim. But in some instances, you have invoices being created, which are basically fraudulently, fake invoices being created. That will cause a mismatch between input VAT and output VAT. You have false claims being made. Now, if you listen carefully, those do not represent the fact that VAT is wrong. It simply means that you are not effectively managing it. It's a management issue. So after looking and examining the whole VAT situation, a big question that needed to be answered was, do we need to change the VAT regime, or do we need to change the administration of the VAT regime? But having moved to the sales tax as an alternative before we answered that question, we now put the sales tax regime itself under massive scrutiny to see whether it will solve our problem. Initially, it did seem like it would address a number of our challenges. One of the things that it seemed it would be able to do was to increase revenue. But that increase in revenue was based on the assumption that the tax rate that we obtain will be 9%. The only problem is, when we came to the administration of that 9%, it was quite clear that with the cascading impact or effect that sales tax has, meaning that it's tax on tax. So if you are assuming that you are a manufacturer and I come to buy from you as maybe a wholesaler, I'll pay you 9% tax, right? Which you collect on behalf of government. Then I have to sell to somebody else, maybe a distributor. He will also pay 9% in addition to 9%. So he pays 18 rather than 9. And if it has to go to another person in the chain, eventually by the time you get to the last customer, you'll probably pay 27%, 28% or more. Now, that has an effect of increasing the price of goods and services. Now, when that happens, it will also suppress the demand for goods. So when that happens, the business people, being rational human beings that they are, will respond by reducing the distribution chain. Now, when you say reduce the distribution chain, what you are basically saying is that they will cut employment, essentially. So if you take just a simple example where we are here in Kalingalinga, when you drive down the road on Alikinkata Road, you will see these people who sell cement. Yeah, those are part of that distribution chain. They are at the far end of the chain, all right?
So with sales tax, this will be cut off. But these things you're explaining were really explained by stakeholders, and government said this was a point of no return.
No, government didn't say it was.
But were you misled by technocrats?
No, there was nothing like that. Maybe the correct thing you can say is that perhaps the engagement before the decision was made wasn't exhaustive enough. But when we engaged the business community and went through the numbers and the permutations and spoke to the various associations that represent the business community, it was very clear that a good number of them, in fact, would cut the distribution chain as a response.
This was basically turned into a battle, not really a consultation.
No, it wasn't.
Government was busy defending, and the public was really
it wasn't.
The stakeholders were really also speaking and trying to get their voice in.
That's not my experience. My experience was that when we came to the point of implementation, we were very open about engagement. In fact, we kept both options open. The VAT option on that side, with the view that you address the inadequacies, but also to listen more intensely to what the business community thought would happen and whether or not it would work. I didn't get a sense that we were fighting. I got a sense that we were listening and talking to each other and trying to understand the actual implications of proceeding with the VAT. Government could have...
Let me quote this article. I think it was written by the ZRI Commissioner. I suppose picked it from internet. And it says, value-added tax in an economy with limited value addition and a large informal sector is bound to fail. And that is the exact complexion of the Zambian economy. And VAT has effectively failed in Zambia. If
you examine this African continent, you'll probably find that out of the 54 countries in Africa, a predominant number, maybe 44, 45, 46, use the VAT regime rather than the sales tax. And those that don't use the sales tax, I mean the VAT regime, use a combination of some other taxes. But most of these countries, in terms of their structure, are structured like we are. What is required from our side is to deal with the administrative challenges. And I think this is the verdict that government eventually arrived at. And cabinet debated this intensely. I know that some people would say, oh, government has done a U-turn and so on. Government is being inconsistent. But I think that when faced with new evidence and new facts arising from analysis, I think it's correct to change your mind.
The position.
Yeah. I mean,
there was another argument that, look, sales tax would eliminate government's dangerous exposure to perpetual refunds which escalate domestic debt and probably push the mines to pay tax. We were told, right on this program, that maybe 2 mines only declared profit. Well, the others have been making losses for the 16, 20 years they've been around.
You are confusing two things there. VAT refund and tax are not one and the same. VAT refund
was supposed to push them to pay more tax.
No. How would sales tax get them to pay more tax? If, for example, you see, tax in the form of corporate tax is paid as a result of working out all your costs, your revenue and your costs, and then ending up with a bottom number. Right? It's from there that you pay. Now, if, for example, a mining company is cheating on its costs, on its inputs, it exaggerates the inputs. It doesn't matter whether you're using VAT or using sales tax. It will still cheat at the end of the day, and you won't be able to get the corporate tax that you expect to get. So the two are not the same. VAT refund, as I explained, is simply a situation of I collect VAT from you, all right, and then at point X I pay it back to you. So in this situation now, what we have decided is that for all capital equipment, for the mining industry, we'll simply zero rate. So I don't collect VAT from them and therefore have no obligation to give them back the VAT. So the problem is not there. Whereas if I collect, I have to give it back. And if I don't ring fence that amount, if I don't ring fence it, then at the time I'm supposed to be paying back, I'll have a problem of paying it. So the easiest way out is to simply zero rate it so that we don't collect it. Remember, VAT is not corporate tax. Corporate tax is different.
So now we had a concern that mines were not investing and instead using VAT refund to plow back into their businesses.
Well, one such company that was injured by the fact that we were collecting VAT but not refunding. So we were actually hurting business by not refunding. We are collecting their money. It's their money, and we're supposed to refund it, less any other, because you get an input and you have an output. So we were supposed to be refunding it. It's not our money. And ideally, what we should have been doing is to ring-fence the money. You ring-fence that money and pay it back when it is required to be paid back. But we make it look as if somehow the money belonged to us. It doesn't belong to us. You are basically refunding business the amount that is due to business to be refunded. VAT is ultimately paid by the final consumer. Remember that. It is not the business that pays the VAT. It's the final consumer, ultimately, who pays that 16%. So whoever is consuming the good at the end of the chain is the one that pays. Because for the final consumer, there is no claim back. But business in between claims back.
Let's look at measures that we've put in place to ensure VAT is more beneficial now, and the reason why you think it should stay.
Well, like I mentioned earlier on, the question that had to be answered, even as we had moved to the decision that will go with sales tax, is what is wrong with VAT something that can be fixed administratively, or is it one that requires a shift in the policy decision? Earlier on, I think the decision was that we required a shift in the policy decision. But when sales tax itself was put under the microscope, because now you're going to implement it. You see, very often things look okay until you begin to implement. If you remember, the first date of implementation was April this year, right? It wasn't done. And then it was shifted later, I think, to August. Again, it wasn't done. Clearly, what that is pointing out is that the challenges of implementing the sales tax now became clearer to those of us who are trying to implement. And at that point now, we have to go back and ask, oh, well, maybe VAT isn't so bad. And the decision was, yes, we can actually reform VAT. The challenge now requires that we make use of technology to ensure that we get rid of all these double claims, all this creation of invoices, because that's what causes the problem. When people are duplicating invoices, when people are cheating. So, for example, now, we are insisting on automation, and the system will be up and running by the beginning of January. We are insisting on compulsory use of electronic fiscal devices, meaning that when you transact, you'll be picked, and information relating to the purchaser and the seller will be transmitted electronically. And the electronic devices are such that ZRA can pick if, for example, you're not using it, because it will communicate. It will be able to show downtime when it was not working. These are just some of the measures that we want to put in place that will ensure that we get on top of the situation. The fact of the matter is that everywhere in the world, people cheat on tax.
Nobody wants to pay tax.
Nobody wants to pay tax. Individuals cheat, businesses cheat. We are not the only country where businesses cheat. But it is the responsibility of those that are charged with collecting tax to ensure that they are on top of their game and catch those who don't do it and make sure that we enforce. There is no point in having rules and regulations that you cannot enforce adequately. So it's the challenge of adequacy of enforcement of our own systems that we agreed to implement.
Now we can quickly run through other issues. One of them is you've pledged to reform the implementation and management of farmer input support program. Again, I'll take you back that this is probably mere rhetoric. All your predecessors probably in the past, maybe 3 of them in the past, have spoken about reforming farmer input support program. Well, we've seen very little in that direction. Well, whether it's been there, it's been chaotic at some point. not getting the best foot forward, I suppose.
Well, that's not exactly fair. Last year, the farmer input program was carried out using the e-voucher system and resulted in a substantial savings for government. One of the things that it brought out was that out of the, I think it was 1.6 million people that were on this scheme, when they used the e-voucher scheme, the number reduced to 800. Okay, so clearly there were dead farmers who were receiving fertilizer. I don't know how they were doing it from their graves, but there were dead farmers who were using fertilizer. But there were few administrative hitches relating to I think it was the transportation of cards that were supposed to be used to trigger payment and so on. Now, because of that, I think there was pushback on it that, no, maybe the system isn't working. So this year what you find is that we have more or less gone back to a larger percentage of the beneficiaries getting their inputs outside the system. But we think that the hitches that we picked from the previous year can be addressed. And that's what we have been working on to address, so that going forward, we'll now be on that electronic platform. I can tell you that there is a lot of wastage around this system. We have already, I think you read in the newspaper that a number of civil servants were found on it, and it's not a small number. Now, we're only able to pick because of going electronic, because now you can match the registration card number with the person. One of, for example, we found a registration number of one of our officials on it, but the name was a woman. This is a man. The man is a woman, and they don't even know each other. So clearly, somebody was using this registration card number to draw fertilizer. So there's a lot of fraud. So there's a lot of fraud. But once we subject it to electronic platform, we'll be able to pick all these inconsistencies and inadequacies in the system and save a lot of money. By the way, we spend quite a lot on FISIP, as you probably know. And if we can make a decent saving on it, that's money, again, that we can put to use in other sectors.
The same applies to social cash transfer?
Social cash transfer.
You want to take it electronic?
Well, to some extent, some of it may, I think it's a process. It will be a process, obviously, because the target group here are people who are very disadvantaged. Some of them have
very low levels of education.
But we can reform the system in such a way that we are able to account more effectively for who draws the money. Right now what happens is that when a guy gets a bag and takes the money and goes out to pay. He takes the money and goes out to pay, and he comes back, he's half paid. Now, I'm not sure that's a very adequate way of payment. Or you don't know exactly which household, how many people are in that household. You don't know if they're still alive, because some of the most vulnerable.
You don't even know if they've actually been paid.
Paid and so on, yeah. So those are the issues and challenges that we must meet. Because sometimes you think you're running a program that is working, and yet it is not working. And you think you are benefiting people, but you find that the resources, in fact, are not going to the people you want to benefit from, but are actually going to other people who really shouldn't be drawing from the system. So those are the kind of challenges that we need to meet. I think
you're working on with moving to electronic system.
Absolutely.
Now, I want you to address this issue. Are you talking about efficiency when you speak about accelerating land titling, reevaluation of rates, and many others? These are things that have been in land titling has been in other budgets as well. I know. But then one would safely conclude that Zambia is probably one of the few countries that makes it very difficult for its nationals to pay government. You queue to pay for a road license. You queue to even pay to get title so you can pay your rates properly. You queue for all this, and government wants money, isn't it?
Yeah, I plead guilty. Yeah, because I also get irritated by inefficiencies in our system, which makes it difficult for people to pay. But those are exactly the challenges that we want to get around. I think that the advancement in technology now gives us a great opportunity, a massive opportunity for us to be able to deal with these challenges. And why not use them? That's exactly what we're trying to do. Why not use this technology to our advantage? In terms of land titling, we have made quite a bit of progress in terms of identifying the potential partners we work with to be able to put in place a system that can track who has what land. I know you have a title deed for this and that, but you'll be shocked that a lot of the land which is on title is actually not on title. Sounds contradictory?
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's the case. In other words, there's, in some cases, fraud, and that has to be discovered. So once we get into the land titling, we'll be also able to get the real value for land for government, because the idea that land has no value is an antiquated idea. I know this was a great idea before, that land has no value, but what has value is the development on that land. Land has inherent value, and government has a lot of it. And there is absolutely no reason why government should not be making decent amount of money from land. We are not making money from land which we should be making. And for that, it's a lost opportunity. But I know that the Minister of Land is very keen to have the land titling project up and running, and we will give her the support from the Ministry of Finance to make sure that this happens, because this is a potential source of revenue for us. But you also did touch on some of these fees that I'm proposing to adjust. The reason basically is this, that various government departments collect charges and fees of different descriptions. Some of these fees have not been revised since God knows when. And in some instances, when you complete a form, you take a form like this and you complete it, you capture the information that they want. The costs of printing that piece of paper is much more than what they're charging you. So clearly, you can't run government like that. So these are some of the anomalies that we're trying to address so that they are cost reflective. We're not trying to charge people or exploit people. No, we're saying that if you...
Or raise money?
No, not at all. I mean, if you're going to apply for something using this piece of paper, then I don't want to be the one to print it free for you. Please, at least pay the little amount of money that is required. So it's really, really that. But I'm also hoping that as we go electronic, as we go more and more into e-government, the need for
less money, less services paid for the paper, for the printing.
And we can realign then the costs with what it actually costs government. It's really, if you like, it's a cost recovery issue rather than a money-making issue.
Venture.
Yeah.
As we go, I want you to, just in a few minutes, so maybe under a minute, try to state the positive takeaways from the budget.
Well, the positive takeaways from the budget are, firstly, we have not punished anybody by adjusting direct tax or indirect tax like VAT rates. And this is because we want to retain value. We want people to keep their money and make use of it. Given the fiscal constraints that we are in, which we all acknowledge, the temptation is for the Minister of Finance to say, I am going to increase tax. That's the temptation. I have not yielded to that temptation. That's, I think, a positive takeaway. The other takeaway is that we have shown commitment to want to change the way that we treat the suppliers of goods and services to us as government by beginning to dismantle this mountain of arrears and also create an opportunity for business to revive in our communities. But there's also another rider to this, which I think I haven't quite mentioned, which is that our view also is that going forward, we should give more and more projects to Zambian contractors as opposed to foreign contractors. In other words, shifting the balance between what goes to foreign contractors as opposed to what goes to Zambian contractors. That, I think, is important. And the reason it is important is that over the years, one hopes that some level of skills transfer has taken place, arising from Zambian people working with the foreign contractors. They have acquired their own skills. They are now able to take on the challenge of carrying out these projects on their own. It can be a case that we will obviously continuously forever go on using foreign contractors to build roads for us, for example, to build houses for us. It's not suitable. It's not.
And export all the money.
That's right. So we want to change that. And I think that's a very important takeaway. And I hope it's something that we want to see done. I know the last word is that you've challenged me with implementation. That's what everybody's saying. I think that's what you have been saying, that we have been saying all these things and we're not doing it. So all I can try to do in the course of implementing my budget is to implement the things that I say I will implement. Doesn't mean there'll be no hitches. I may find myself running up against 1 or 2 hitches. But by and large, we'll try to implement
probably 90%.
If we can.
Honourable Minister,
if we can.
Wish you success as you implement the budget.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have for you this evening. That was Dr. Bwalya Ngandu, the Minister of Finance, looking at the budget, 2020 budget, presented on Friday. We'll be back next week sometime. Pleasant viewing.